second session. In the morning, we discuss the thematic areas from disinformation, hate speech, and gender and sexual violence on social media. Now, this is an extension to that session, and we are going to start with a panel discussion. As explained in the morning, we have simultaneous interpretation available. The discussion will be happening in English. However, if you would like to raise a question in any language, please feel free to do so. We should be able to manage with either Google translations or taking the question on the same language the question was raised. So to the audience who was joining us on social media, thank you so much for coming in. If you have questions during the panel discussion, please feel free to send them in via comments, and our team should be able to get them across to the panelists. So now it's my honor to introduce our esteemed guest. I think everyone knows who are on the panel, so I'm not going to go to detailed introductions, but I'll start from my right-hand side. We have Dr. Lanka Kalansurya. He's the advisor for Asia Pacific and Asia Pacific for International Media Support, and also the former Director General of the Government Information Department. Welcome, sir. And we have Mr. Shamil Zawahir. He's an attorney at law. He's also the director of the Justice Sector Reforms Program of the Ministry of Justice. And then we have Bhavani Fonseca, who's an attorney at law. She's also a senior researcher at Center for Policy Alternatives. The purpose of this discussion is because we had the thematic discussions before, and we can't really avoid the fact that we are in social media times, and there are laws that have the potential to curb dissent, to affect freedom of speech. And since we have a gathering of civil society partners who are working on civil and political rights, we thought it's apt to have this conversation. And please feel free to ask questions. So this session will be of 2 rounds. First round, we'll have one set of question each from panelists, and there'll be a common question. And we'll open the floor for a brief Q&A session. So if you have any questions from the first round, please raise it. Then we have a second round of, again, another interventions from the panelists. Then we open for Q&A. The period for this session will be 1 hour. So I'll start with Bhavani, because we need to set a bit of context. If you could, sorry, I have to mention it. This is 5-minute intervention in the first go. So if you could speak a little bit about the legal status of freedom of expression in Sri Lanka, and what are the laws that guarantee freedom of expression. We know this, some of us know this in detail, some of us know in a very haste stage. So over to you.
Thanks, Netmini, and I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you to #Generation for organizing this very timely event. I apologize I couldn't be here in the morning with you, but I gather you had a very interesting discussion. So the whole, and I noticed we have 3 lawyers on this panel, so I apologize if it becomes too legalistic. The whole is guaranteed in the Constitution, 14(1)(a), which says freedom of speech expression is guaranteed. But so Article 15 has specific restrictions for some rights, which is on the lines of national security, public order, public health, all of that. So that's clearly set out in the Constitution. What I want to speak about in the few minutes is to show that we may have the freedom of speech and expression guaranteed and restrictions provided in the Constitution, but we have other laws that infringe on the right to speak, the right to express, the right to write, communicate, all of that. And that's something we need to be very aware of. The gamut of laws that is out there, but also other means of restricting speech. So the Constitution at one level says this is provided, it's guaranteed, but there are specific laws like the Penal Code, the PTA and the PT amendments. Now it's become a hot topic. We can go into it if you like a bit later. But there are specific laws, ICCPR Act, cyber crimes, all of that. There's also, I just want to be very clear, the Supreme Court has provided safeguards of jurisprudence. So there's a rich tapestry of case law that ensures that even if you criticize the government or a particular individual, you cannot be arrested or charged because that's a fundamental right in a democracy. So a democracy provides specific guarantees to any citizen to speak their mind. And even the provisions in the Constitution that restricts rights says one very clear thing: it has to be provided by law. So as lawyers will say, yes, of course, then the law has to be there. You can't just have a press release or a circular that says we are going to take away these rights. Now, why I say this is in 2020 and 2021, because of the pandemic, and we all know with the pandemic, there were restrictions imposed. There were various developments, unprecedented. It was a health crisis, unprecedented. But we also saw people being questioned for statements they made criticizing the government or for posts they put on Facebook. So the question then is, on what basis was that action taken? Was there a law or was it arbitrary? So the main point, and then we can go into a bit more later if you have questions, is there are very clear specific guarantees in the Constitution. There are also restrictions. Those restrictions have to be by law. Those can't be arbitrary. Just because I don't like someone, I can't go and arrest them. It has to be within the law. But that's, and the Supreme Court jurisprudence that provides a safeguard. So there's a rich tapestry of jurisprudence there. But, and this is the big but, is we have laws such as the PTA, which has been used against journalists. We have a case of Tissanagam, who was convicted for his writing. We have the ICCPR Act, where individuals who have posted things on Facebook were arrested and detained. Ramzi Rasik's case is there. And I raised Ramzi Rasik's case because in his case, in the bail application, the judge actually recognizes the importance of freedom of expression. So there are also laws that give certain powers to the government to arrest and detain, but those have also been challenged. There's also that avenue within the Supreme Court where you can go and challenge. So in a way, we have some good news and some bad news, because certain things can be weaponized, certain laws can be weaponized, and that's the crux of it, is how a law is used or abused. And that's something we will hopefully get into. How what you say or what you write can be targeted. And then what are the things we can do? So hopefully we get to that.
Thank you, Bhavani. And I think we can correctly link it back to the next question I was planning on asking from Shami. It's just like Bhavani said, we saw during the unprecedented health crisis, of course, there were many press releases issued, or to say, not even press releases sometimes, it's just at press conferences, some decisions were announced saying that if you do A, B, and C, you can get arrested. But if we have like legal exceptions, and restrictions imposed, how do we, I mean, where do we stand? Like, is it possible? Has this been challenged if the arrests were made? If not so, why people are not challenging, and what is the status quo? Because you two are really connected to the Minister of Justice side. So we'd like to raise that question from you.
Thank you, Netme. I think Bhavani gave a very good explanation as to the legal background with regard to freedom of expression in our constitution, and Article 14.1a, and of course, also read with Article 10, freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and so on. And Article 10 is a very wide, has a very wide gamut, and it's an entrenched provision as well. So if you take the gist, or if you take the intention behind the legislature, it was very clear that this was a right which was meant to be interpreted mostly towards or in favor of the citizen. I mean, even the preamble to the Constitution, if you were to read the mood, I would use that word informally, or how the Constitution is drafted, you would see that it is a liberal Constitution that we have here. But of course, as you know, there are acts like the PTA and ICCPR, which has put certain restrictions on this. Now, even Article 15 of the Constitution, if you take things like national security, incitement of a crime, racial and religious harmony. Now, just as much as 10 and 14.1a are wide, even the restrictions placed on it leave quite a bit of room for interpretation. So it's very easy to get stuck on 10 and 14.1a without looking at how balanced in the opposite direction 15 is. And in my opinion, that is because it is very difficult, I would say, practically, to enforce or to give freedom of expression as an unrestricted right to a citizen. Now, if you take, I would say, freedom from torture is an unrestricted. I don't think you can justify torturing somebody. You can't say, I mean, we had to torture you because of the pandemic or something. But circling back to this point as to what happened during the pandemic, I understand this is not only unique to our country. This has happened in lots of the other jurisdictions as well. Governments found it very hard to deal with this situation. It was a medical, health, economic crisis of unprecedented levels. And you were working against the clock. It's now, with the curfews lifted and things to a level of normalcy, it's a little easier for us to see it at a distance and think, my goodness, that was an extreme measure. It shouldn't be allowed under our constitution. But it's the whole press release and the enforcement and the law authorities getting involved in what may have been seen as a violation of the freedom of expression, remember, was not purely this sort of anti-governmental elimination drive. In addition to criticism of government and so on, there was and there still is this massive issue of disinformation about the pandemic and possible solutions to it. Now, at that time, I don't know whether on what side of the coin I want to land, but if you look at just how difficult it was to get things under control, the vaccines, there's vaccine disinformation. We still have a huge vaccine disinformation problem. When situations like that arise, it's difficult for any government, law enforcement, to figure out where to balance it. That is, I think, the issue. I don't think even the most liberal believer in freedom of expression, in the height of the pandemic with so many problems, would say, no, despite everything, the freedom of expression has to be absolute. If somebody wants to start a radio channel saying that vaccines are going to kill you and go against the vaccine drive, they should be allowed. Then this is a problem that even Western countries are facing now. And it is setting everybody back. The no mask mandate issue, we don't want to get a vaccine issue. So if you were to look at it purely from the angle of freedom of expression and just go on the basis that you can't even have a press conference and tell people to stop spreading misinformation, and you had to adopt, let's say, legislative measures, I think it would be a case of, closing the barn gate after the horse has bolted. So I think what's important to remember is that throughout this, we had a functioning court system. True, there were lockdowns and the courts were closed, but we were also working against the clock to get Zoom, to get bail over Zoom, to see if we can have, virtual hearings, how we can have measures, the Bar Association, the ministry. There was a huge drive to let the justice system run. So I think from the point of view of a government, that would be the best it could do, which is to have a uncorrupted, functioning and efficiently functioning judiciary. Because at the end of the day, no matter how extreme the executive goes, it's the judiciary that brings it back and finds that balance. And I think you can say, I can say, in my personal belief, that if you were to keep the judiciary functioning independently and efficiently, even throughout a pandemic, even when things are going a little haywire, I think that is the best safeguard or the balance that you can provide in a democracy. So, I mean, that is my initial take on it, and I will.
Thank you, Shamir. I think lot to I think discuss on this topic, but because it's the first round, we'll come back to it maybe during the second common question about existing laws and its implementation, and how far the government, any government, not just incumbent, should go to restrict the freedoms. But I would like to turn to Dr. Ankaran Surya because of this, because of now example, yes, there's an infodemic, and there's a self-censorship that's going on, not to the same extent that we might be used to, but to some extent. So in this sense, we see a lot of journalists are moving their platforms online, discussing matters online, because they might not be getting the space that they used to get maybe. But as the DG government information, I think you're in a better place to comment on it, because a lot of people source their information from social media. So if you like, why is it so important that even in troubled times or unprecedented times, that we should make all our efforts to make sure there's a free flow of information and people are not scared to speak up?
Yeah, thank you, Nitni. I think when you talk about self-censorship, the definition of self-censorship could not be applied to the context of Sri Lankan legacy media. That's my belief. Maybe you might have a different view. And also, as Bhavani said, I look a bit odd here because in the presence of three eminent lawyers, the non-lawyer here, quite unbalanced panel in that case. But when you say self-censorship, that means when the media is oppressed or suppressed, then the media adapt to censorship by themselves. But the Sri Lankan context is different. The legacy media, what we call the legacy, the traditional media in Sri Lanka, of course, one can argue the fact that they are oppressed or somehow, but in the present context, it's rather media capture than self-censorship. What we call media capture is the political or economic interest is driving the media content. That is the issue of in the context of Sri Lanka. When Shamir was saying about this, government is confused and government has to take some actions on when pandemic like COVID is spreading fast. I fully agree with him. But Samir, when the government itself becomes the planter of disinformation, the engine of disinformation, then the public, we get confused. We didn't see a clear policy from the government until the first 8 months of pandemic, whether we are going to have vaccines or mutti or penny. So that's the problem. So we saw how Dhammika Paniya was promoted by the captured media. The state sponsorship for Dhammika Paniya. Health minister, the speaker, everybody followed this Paniya and they got COVID-19 also. So the state became the engine of disinformation. The state players, the health minister and her colleagues were throwing mutti to rivers. So where is the disinformation coming from? So we get confused. And institutions like hashtag generation, they get confused. How to fact check this? I'm sorry. Okay. So I'm reading a very interesting paper by our friend Gihan Gunatilaka these days about disinformation, and where he discusses, it's not yet out, but I got the privilege to read it. He argues about this issue on how when state becomes the engine of disinformation, how we react. So this is the problem. And disinformation was not on social media, mind you. The state engine, I don't blame the state, the institute of state, but some people belong to the state or the government. They did not use social media for this. They used the legacy media. 96% of Sri Lankan population still receive their information through television. This is a proven fact through a research done by myself and Nala Gugunwadana 2 years back. So the planters of disinformation very well aware of this fact that people of this country receive information through television, 96%. So they use the mode, the channel of legacy media to spread this disinformation. I can comfortably say that it's a disinformation because Paniya is no more. The license is also lost. And the particular channels that promoted Paniya are not even looking at this poor man who was, praised to the skies and then smashed to the ground within a couple of days. He should go and file a human rights case, fundamental rights case in the Supreme Court. Why? I mean, his rights were violated, no? Why was he promoted? We have facts to say that he was brought in before the Ayurveda clinical board, and he was testing before the board. While he was testing, he was grabbed and he was taken to the media station before he was allowed to get the license. So who spread this disinformation? So, of course, you ask me the question, should we have these social media platforms? In this context, the value of social media platforms are immense to highlight this. Who became the fact checker on this? Social media. But I'm not hailing them. I'm not entirely for that, because just because our legacy media is lying and spreading disinformation, we should have social media platforms. That's not my argument. We should have proper, ethical, high standard media in this country to fact check social media, but it's happening vice versa now. So this is a massive question in this country for our media landscape on how to keep check and balance. You asked me about good democracy. What are the qualities of good democracy? Transparency and accountability. So who keep track on transparency and accountability in this country? Can we trust legacy media to do that? which has been captured by political interest entirely. Why I say political interest? Because none of the channels are making profits in this country. None of the media stations are making profits in this country. So why are they running? Then their entire interest is political interest. We know that. So in that context of politically captured media, we need somebody to have check and balances, to get transparency into the system, to get accountability into the system. In that context, in that sphere, I would say, yes, we need some alternative information mechanism. We have many issues. I would definitely, I use this opportunity to congratulate and express my sincere gratitude to organizations like #Generation. I will elaborate in my next session why why I am saying this, but the youth, entirely driven by youth, and have good social roots in this country. Organizations like we need dozens of them, because the disinformation machinery in this country, not entirely by the government, I'm not blaming the government for that, but it's part of the problem. And we have another parts. We have nationalistic elements, we have radical elements, we have plenty of them. So we need institutions like #Generations in dozens to keep the society safe and this country improved. But the problem is that we have only one or two like this. We really feel that, because especially like a time of COVID-19 pandemic, of course, disinformation campaigns on anti-vaccine, against vaccine campaigns are global. It's a global campaign. We have seen that in many countries. So you have to have some mechanism to counter this. But I haven't seen any government is sponsoring these campaigns or engineering these campaigns. Let's withdraw the word sponsoring, but at least encouraging these campaigns, and then blame the society for not going for vaccination. Is that enough? Yeah.
Thank you. I think the second round of questions are very specific about the current discussion on specific laws that are being brought. So before going there, because I think everyone in the room agrees that we have a problem with disinformation, agrees that we have a problem with hate speech online, and also sexual and gender-based violence, massive issues. And we also have laws, right? We have been having laws. The Constitution itself says freedom of expression is a relative right and not an absolute right. And there are plenty of laws that are being discussed. Still, we have the issue. And the other side of the spectrum, which I do not stand, says, we need more regulations. Otherwise, we can't go ahead like this. And we are just keep talking. We have to have laws. And we also know how the implementation works. So it's a general open question for all three. Do you think bringing in more laws will help the situation that we are in right now? Because the second part of the questions is on particular laws. So it's a general question, maybe 2-3 minutes each. Would it help? Maybe start with Bhavan.
At the outset, I want to say 2-3 minutes is insufficient for this question, but I'll keep it very brief. I would say there are a couple of questions to that, what you posed, in terms of when you say, do we need new laws? What is the objective of a new law? Ask that question, because one of the things in Sri Lanka that we have in plenty is the fact we have so many laws. I mean, just a glance at looking at the laws that give powers to the state to regulate, to arrest, to detain is so much that what is a new law going to do? Now, some will say, because some of these laws are very old, you need to, in terms of the new technology, you need new laws. Fine. Then what happens to the old law? Does the old law stay in the books or does it get repealed? The other question is the whole issue of lawmaking process in Sri Lanka. Sad to say, under successive governments, they will bring in a bill which may say A, B, C, but by the time it gets passed, it's a very different bill. So we've seen even in the recent past, for example, the 20th Amendment, the Port City Bill, the Finance Act, all of those. What was presented, gazetted and presented in Parliament, what was challenged in court, changed considerably because committee stage amendments were brought in. Now that was brought in because there were challenges, and that's a right. Anyone can challenge within 7 days. And that's something I encourage all of you to look at, is we've gone to court challenging, and as a result managed to at least tweak certain laws, or just to also be very upfront here, challenge certain things where the state has actually come and said, we are going to withdraw because there are problems. So challenging, and that's something to think about in your sessions also, is very important. Monitoring, studying and challenging a bill is your right and should be done responsibly, but should be done. But when you talk about bringing in a new law, I would also caution as to what ends up as that law. Because what may be brought in can change considerably when it goes to Parliament. We have, as citizens, no control over that lawmaking process after that 7-day window shuts down. So just be mindful that we may all say, yes, we need new laws, but the lawmaking process is so critical. But as you said, and I know time is short, is the implementation, because we do have a lot of laws. We do have a lot of laws that get forgotten because some of the laws that are used are the ones that are used to weaponize, to target. And those are the more popular laws. But there are others that could also be used. But I'll also stop here, is how the law is implemented is also very, very partial. It targets some for speaking the truth, but ignores others who may be inciting violence. And there are many examples in the public domain, very public individuals who, for particular reasons of political protection or patronage, whatever, are not touched. But a journalist who speaks the truth may get targeted under the ICCPR Act, under the PTA, under the Penal Code. So it's also the implementation, the very, very subjective way of implementation is also something to be mindful when we talk about bringing in new laws.
Thank you, Bhavani.
In response to the question, our new go-to answer for that is yes. I don't think there's ever going to be a time where you could just look at a justice system and say, think we're done here. We don't need any more laws for another 5 years. We are done. For a couple of reasons. One is, I mean, the normal phrase that keeps coming up are the laws are old, the laws are old. Another thing that, well, I've seen in practice is sometimes when you set out to pass a law, even it is, I wouldn't say there's this purposive intention to change the direction of, there may be in instances, but I've personally seen where you set out to do something, and along the stakeholder consultations, along the different people getting involved in the stage to get the bill drafted, going to the Attorney General, but constitutionality checks and coming on. Sometimes the end result, even before it gets to Parliament, is a very different character to what was initially set out to do. Now, and that is sometimes not purposive. It is also sometimes, it is impossible for a singular group of people to consider all the different angles when it comes to a law. I'll give you an example. When we were working on the Coronavirus Act, we worked with a lot of lawyers. We worked with lawyers. We worked with maybe the Attorney General's department, experts. in the field of law and legal counsel who are experts in commercial law. And we came up with our initial draft. And somewhere towards the end of it, before it was going, one of the chambers of commerce asked for a consultation. And we always like to have stakeholder consultation. And we had a chat with them. And from the point of view of businesses, they were able to list out a whole range of issues which none of the lawyers had seen, even the best commercial lawyers who were retained, because it was just their inability to, you can't process information as relevant to any specific stakeholder group unless you're in that group. You just can't. So what the thing with legislation is, so sometimes you pass a law, you get to a stage, and it is only after the law is even passed, unless, of course, because even though the 7-day window is there, I don't think everybody who has an interest in a bill or an act is going to come and challenge it or have that, it's not possible. You only start seeing the issues after it starts getting into practice. It is at that stage, then you may have to go back to the drawing board. You decide, do we go back to the drawing board? Do we amend it? Do we bring in another law? Do we have regulations to fix this? Can it be done by a gazette? So any type of law, even when it comes to hate speech or things, cyberbullying, it is a constant process where it is not possible to predict. That's one. Secondly, I agree with Bhavani. This implementation is the other issue. Now, without going into the area of things such as the ICCPR, PTA, and those areas, let me speak on a more practical issue with implementation, which is something like cyberbullying or leaked photos of like intimate photos that are sort of put out to social media. Now, the laws are actually to some extent good. But when someone goes to the police station, the person who's taking the complaint, the policeman may actually psychologically straight away blame the girl, saying, why would you send these photos to begin with? Because they can't remove themselves from there. They always think, I would never let my daughter do something like this. So this is my family did this, it would be. So they, regardless of what the law says about what the other party did is right or wrong, they bring in their subjective take. And then they try to advise to the victim saying, why are you doing these things? Boys are like, I know boys are like this. And so some complete, it's completely. So the law, you may have the laws drafted by the most brilliant legal minds. And the government may have absolutely nothing to do with influencing that policeman. But on a ground level, he brings his subjective experience, and it starts there. So there is a very difficult question to answer, even when it comes to implementation. One is the state, whether the state gets involved, that is one question and one aspect that Bhavani. But even without there being active sort of participation by the state, there is implementation issues purely because of the culture that's present. That also comes into play. So, I mean, that is one of the issues I also see. So laws also need to change. But this change of this culture, not general societal culture, may take a while to change. But at least I feel in people who have direct control over enforcing the law, there has to be a shift in taking your personal take out of it and looking at it objectively. I think that is somewhere we need to go.
Thank you. So we had three interesting perspectives. I'm very mindful of time, I know, because I'm getting signals saying that we have time. But I'm coming to Dr. Ranga before we open for a round of questions, because this is very interesting for me personally as well. The two sides of the coin, like laws need to evolve, we need to bring new laws, implementation, and also why these laws are being brought over to you.
Yeah, thank you. One, to prove the point that Samir brought in about this 7-day period of Supreme Court intervention. One good case study is this recent data protection law, the Data Protection Act, where There were some groups to make some interventions, but on some technical reasons, there really was not granted. The issue is here, but looking at the bill, data protection bill, it's one of the best in Asia, I should say that. But there is a problem in freedom of expression part in that as well, because it curtails the rights of journalists of investigating stories. So it's a major concern. So that's why Young Journalists Association tried to get the intervention from Supreme Court, but they failed. But Samir, we have to get some committee stage involvement into this. Otherwise, it curtails, number one, the powers of the Right to Information Act. Number two, the journalists' rights of investigating stories. Let's come to that. I mean, there are how to deal with it. But if you ask me, you need further laws. I should say, I can remember Dr. Deepika Udagama in one of our forums. I think Viranjana was there at that forum as well. When we did this election and media forum, she said, categorically, she said in English, and then she translated in Sinhala, she said, no law can legitimize human behavior. So law is not okatattaile. Yeah, it's a tool, it's useful, but it's not kokatatta. I'll give you one example because time is running out. When this Priyanta Kumara was murdered, lynched and murdered in Sialkot, the same night, it happens around 2 o'clock. I think the story broke around 2 o'clock. By 5, 6, in one of the WhatsApp groups, we started brainstorming. This could encourage or this could create some backlash in Sri Lanka against Muslims. So we quickly mobilized a team, including hashtag generation. We requested them to strictly monitor strictly in the sense, there are a few, hashtag generation members who cooperated with us. This is purely on volunteer basis. We started monitoring and we saw emerging posts, and hashtag was very quick to respond to them. And then we established a link with Pakistan through our Pakistani journalist friends. We requested them to send us real-time information of measures by Pakistani government. So we were getting plethora of information from Imran Khan's messages to police reports, to statements, through a network of media startups. We started distributing them, including police reports. That's number two. Number one was monitoring. Number two was establishing a link to provide exact information, reliable information, and countermeasures by the government. Number three, we requested Facebook to enhance their monitoring capacity and response capacity, not to provoke our Desha Premi gang in Sri Lanka. So I must be thankful to hashtag generation for working 24/7 non-stop for 3 days. I should give full credit. These are very silent operations. These are very, I should not say this in public, but we have to say this because my point is no law can do this. These are purely volunteer and also common sense and reacting on time to avoid any backlash. I know how deep the hashtag generation went into monitoring and how deep our contacts in Pakistan. In fact, you would have seen this Sorry Sri Lanka campaign. So that was one of the results of that network we established between Sri Lanka and Pakistan through media links. So if you are to avoid disinformation, if you are to avoid hate speech, if you are to get good information on platform, it's not only law. It's your common sense it's your ethics, and it's your balanced thinking. So, of course, laws are important, but plus, plus, plus. Thank you.
We'd like to open the floor for questions to see at this stage, because we also covered quite a lot content-wise. Okay, we have a question. Yeah.
Mic check.
Hi, my question is to either Dr. Ranga or Mr. Zawahir. The question is on, you spoke about media capture, Dr. Ranga, but I want to know is, are we going to discuss at some point about how fact-checking itself is being captured in Sri Lanka? I haven't studied enough to know about the global context of it, but I understand it's happening in Sri Lanka. But I think it's an important conversation that we should be having.
Politics can capture anything. So not only media and fact checking, it can capture anything in this context. So I know, I understand your question, and I know the context of the question also. So I know, I agree with you. Fact checking is also may get captured politically, but the quality work can stand by itself. That's my response. Well, we have to wait and see how far it goes.
Big response, but I think that's as best we can go. Any other questions from the audience, please, before we go to the second round? Or any panelists would like to add or comment on each whatever that's been said by each other? Yeah, okay, we can come back later. Right, so this is about now in the 2021, there were 3 key laws that were discussed. Like Dr. Ranga said, Data Protection Week and Fake News Act, obscene publications. I think these were heavily discussed. Now, 2022, we are back to Prevention of Terrorism Act and the amendments, right? So my question is to Bhavani, especially on fake news bill and the Obscene Publications Act, because of course, when you look at it and the conversations about it, about introducing POFMA as a part of the bill of fake news, it's going to limit free speech online and offline and this social media. So with a special reference to social media, my question is, now fake news bill is no longer being discussed, at least in public sphere. Obscene publications bill was rescinded, saying that there will be consultations in future. In 2022, what are we to expect? And how can we do some, if it comes up, what can the audience do? Because we have a group of people who can actually come together and join forces.
Thanks, Rukmini. I would also add to that, it's not a law, but the PTA regulations that were introduced in March 2021 is something also I would urge people to look at. That's now before the Supreme Court. We've challenged it. There's a stay order till the conclusion of the case, but that also provides, and the reason I raise it is it provides, it's very broad, and that's one of the concerns, is that any word spoken or any act that can incite, can result in, and I'm just very much paraphrasing this, is can result in 2 years rehabilitation. Now, we don't know what that rehabilitation could entail, but the worrying thing is the judicial process is not involved. So it's a very much an executive decision that is going to result in 2 years rehabilitation. So that's in court. And why I raised that is the fact that several CPA, but several others have challenged it. There is a case ongoing, and that's an example of realizing something is about to be introduced or has been introduced, studying it, studying the implications, raising concerns as to what that regulation or law could mean, and if needed, challenging. But as I said, a lot of the times with bills is we only have a very short window to look at it. So it's one of the key things I would say for everyone here in the room, but also watching virtually, is one has to be always monitoring what's going to happen. Having to ask questions. So social media is a good platform to ask a question, what has happened? Now, Shamir may be able to explain to us some of the committees that have been set up by the Ministry of Justice to look at law reform. What's the status? Is something in the pipeline that we should all be involved in? That also needs to be countered, and I'm saying this, is we also have processes like task forces coming up with potential plans that could impact in the laws, in lawmaking. So that's also something to watch. So being very much alert, monitor, being able to engage, and challenging. I mean, as lawyers, we can say it's easy to challenge. You go and file something. It's not easy to challenge for many people. The Supreme Court is in Colombo. What happens to those who are outside of Colombo? You have to do it in a very short time period in terms of a bill. If it's an infringement, it's 30 days unless it's an ongoing violation. But all of these things are setbacks for a person who's not very familiar with the legal process, with the judicial process. So ensuring there are conversations as to what can be done if you want to challenge. And that's where social media also comes in, and journalists who study it and report correctly, because a lot of the times I also see in the media is incorrect reporting, and that confuses people even more. So it's also thinking about how do you train people to report, understand. A lot of the times, even with cases, a journalist says, can you explain in 5 points what the case is? It's impossible sometimes in 5 points. So it's also thinking not just the response, but long-term work in terms of all these things that are going to likely to come up. And we will all be running up and down, trying to figure out what to do. Start the work early. And these conversations are very important.
Thank you, Bhavani. Starting the work early, it's something that because of the at speed in which things are coming, we just can't wait, and it's 7 days anyway. I think the next question, Shamir, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go fast because of the time. There's this conversation about new communication decency law. There have been comments made. I think Dr. Pratibha Mahaname has spoken about it in public. Is this a repackaging of the fake news bill? What are we to expect of it? That's one part of the question. Second part is that because there are committees, but not unless you are a lawyer who's used to the system of how the lawmaking works and what the committee stage amendments are, how can people get involved or give their feedback? Or, like you said in the Chamber of Commerce incident, unless you have that perspective, you might not notice it, right? So how can people join, or how can people contribute? So 2 parts.
In relation to the first question, I mean, I can't comment on media reports and sort of rumors about potential laws. Even with regard to the fake news bill, I think just calling it the fake news bill itself just puts this notion in people's head that this is this sort of draconian attempt to silence any dissent. In reality, if you were to look at the facts, even countries like Australia, the UK, the European Union has addressed this question of disinformation and how even countries, democratic processes get affected by sort of targeted campaigns online spreading disinformation. So it is not that every bit of disinformation is harmful. There's enough harmless disinformation also. Point is, you have to first understand that this is an actual problem. That's the first step. You can't sort of, the moment you hear about regulating of any sort of online content, you can't have a knee-jerk reaction and says, no, this can't be done under any circumstances, and it's going to be used to stop. And then people straight away jump to POFMA in Singapore and start saying that how that's used. But that is not, I say that is not how you should look at the issue. You should first look at all the countries and see whether this sort of attempt at regulating online falsehoods is something that's only being done here. And the answer to that is no. Secondly, have other countries successfully managed to bring in a correct balance? Again, the answer to that is, that's a subjective answer. Some countries like to say that their experience with it has been bad, like Malaysia, which they had to walk back some things because of pressure. You take Hungary or the Czech Republic or even Australia, right? Even France. Now, France is a country which has always prided itself on freedom of expression. But when it comes to this, they are now talking about the necessity to regulate out of fear of the fact that by the very allowing it to go unregulated, it does a full circle and comes back and affects the democratic process. So it's a very interesting debate, which we can, I think, debate for like 2 hours on this complete panel on that question alone. But the fact of the matter remains that the ideal behind it, how the end result turns out is still something that has to go through stakeholder consultations. We have to see where the balance finishes. But we do have a vibrant judiciary, and any legislative process, I know you can argue and say it's a short period, but the thing is, it's there. It's not something that's inaccessible. It's not something that can't be used, and it has been used. Even the most, even with regard to large scale acts and bills, the constitution has been used to come in, and the Supreme Court has said, no, you can't do this. It's not constitutional. And governments have had to amend it to bring it in line. So I think we can say with a level of confidence that no matter how much, I mean, you may want to think of the worst case scenario, and I think it's always fair to think as a citizen of a country, right? If there's any situation which might even reduce your right by 0.1%, it is very fair to be concerned about it, right? But it is important to follow it, see if the ideals are being met, and also look at how the judiciary and the constitutional protections can be used to balance it out in favor in the end. I mean, we have had a very vibrant judiciary, and we have had different times in which the judiciary have come in, and so even things which seemed impossible to change have changed because of that. So I think that is with regard to and I have faith that the judiciary will continue to do that regardless of how things play out. That's the first one, right? And with regard to how you can get involved, just briefly, like the Justice Ministry, we have 5 subcommittees that work under the Special Project Unit, which is commercial law, civil law, criminal law, infrastructure development, and digitization and court automation. Within those 5, we have several advisory committees, about 20 plus at last count. The total of about 300 lawyers working full time on the advisory committees have short turnaround times of 30 to 60 days. Man, if you are, I mean, this is very public information. We are very happy to share it with you what the subcommittees are, what the advisory committees are, who the heads of those committees are, what they are involved in, criminal law reform, what areas they are involved in, civil law reform, what areas. So, and if you feel that one of those advisory committees you would like to meet or to discuss with the heads of those with regard to your concerns in that area, I mean, this is a very open process. We are not sort of keeping it closed and suddenly coming up with a bill. So we'll be more than happy to accommodate sort of any answers with regard to our process.
One question, the follow-up. So if someone wants to, can they write to the committees, or how can they reach out to the committees? Is there a process?
So we have a reforms division, which is full-time involved in administering the process. So you can certainly write to them and to find out about the reforms that are currently happening. We have been very open about it. So you can get that information from there.
Thank you so much. I just asked the question because we have an audience and we really can use it. Final question to Dr. Ranga. And the question is because you are also engaged with the social media intermediaries, and we are looking at a holistic approach, not just laws, also ethics and how we think about it, culture, but I think social media intermediaries also play a huge role in this situation. And how can civil society organizations collaborate and work together to push the civil society, in social media intermediaries? And what are your thoughts? What can we really do?
I know how pressed you are for the time. So I'll take only a couple of minutes. Number one, I should give full credit to the Justice Ministry. As Samir said, the legal reform process has been flexible and democratic, I should say. We saw it from this, from the withdrawal of this obscene obligation law. So that's a good move. And that's one point number one. Number two is about the social media regulation. Of course, Samir has elaborated how other countries attempted to do that. Even Singaporeans they have accepted the fact that the law they brought in a couple of years ago is not working well on regulating social media. So they are looking at reforms of that law now. So I don't think any legal system has served the purpose in global context. We are working as international media support. We are working in at least 10 countries in Asia, but I don't think we have seen any successful model. But there are some interesting models, Netni, as you said, the involvement of the civil society and getting them to a system of self-regulation. We have seen it in European Union, working quite well. And we have seen it in Australia. And now New Zealand publicized that their code 2 days back for public consultation. Those are very prominent and progressive developments happening in regulating social media. And the social media intermediaries are welcoming this move, and they are so far flexible and engaging. So this is something interesting that we are also looking at in Sri Lanka, whether we can have a code for this intermediary platforms, hopefully through Asia Internet Coalition in Hong Kong and Singapore, try to develop a code for self-regulation. I don't think the legal framework may work, but they might, because as Shamir said, you need the public consultation process to develop laws. So these practices could feed into that. What's happening in Australia, what's happening in European Union could be useful for other countries. Not that there is one, thing fit all, but we can adapt to our cultural, social context and see whether it works. Because small country like Sri Lanka I don't think we can bring laws against these massive US corporate giants, whether they are flexible to us. There should be some practical solutions to this. We can say we will bring laws or whatever, but whether they are agreeable to that, we saw what happened in Pakistan. So I believe some self-regulatory mechanism will be ideal. We can test, we can try, nothing like trying, and feed them into the policy-making process.
Thank you so much. And I think we managed to discuss so much in such a little time. I personally wish we had more time to go in depth and discuss. Any questions from the audience, please? Oh yeah, we have a question. 2. Guys, we need the mics.
Hi, this is regarding the last comment. While agreeing that self-regulation it's agreeable, can you further elaborate on how best we can include this self-regulation into the existing policies and the systems that are in place? Thank you.
We can't do it right now. We have to see how it goes and how far it works and who should be involved. So we are brainstorming these ideas now among few people and see, and of course, government has to come as a stakeholder. Otherwise, we can't do that. Not the government to lead it, but to be a part of it. This should be entirely civil society driven mission. So we are still, it's hanging somewhere. Let's see how it goes.
Hi, this is regarding data protection bill. There are possibility for overriding existing Right to Information Act by the proposed data protection bill. How do you look at that issue?
Asking me.
The entire
I mentioned this. I mentioned about because I don't know the legal status. RTI Act says it's superseding. Now, data protection bill says it is also superseding law. So who supersedes who? Number one. Number two, definitely that was a concern by the Young Journalists Association of Supreme Court intervention. They have listed out 9 issues in this law. So the main thing for us is this rights of journalists. They want journalists to be exempted. RTI Act, we have to find a solution. I think nothing can be done until we get into the committee stages now. So we have to make some lobbying through parliamentarians who understand these things. That's the most challenging thing. Finding parliamentarians who understand these things.
At the risk of sounding self-promotion, but hashtag generation did a webinar on the data protection bill with so many people that were involved in drafting it, with ICTA, CERT, and Dr. Gihan Gunathilaka for the legal side. If you are interested, I think our recording should be available online. We discussed the issue in detail. I'm sorry, I don't think we have the time to go into it, but it's available. Any other questions, Bhavani? Yeah.
And I apologize, I should have brought this. One of the big things we'll have to see, and I don't know if it's going to happen, Shamir may have more information, the government has said we're going to have a new constitution. There is a committee of experts who have drafted something. So we're talking about specific laws and whether they'll come about. We may actually this year be talking about whether there is a new constitution, whether there's going to be a new Bill of Rights. This is something to keep an eye out because this could impact everything we've been talking about. And what are the problems we have seen with the present constitution? Would they be even addressed in a new constitution? But finally, I also want to say process matters. So far, there's been very limited statement on what is possibly going to be the most important process, drafting process, very limited conversations. So I don't know how many even in this room has been engaged in this constitution drafting, sending submissions, some of us have, but we have very limited information. Is it actually going to happen? And Ranga's point about parliamentarians, end of the day, what form any laws. And if we are not going to engage with parliamentarians, and quite rightly, only a handful will understand a very specific piece of law, that is something to really think about. Who will be the champions in parliament? Who will be the champions? Things. When it happens, there's not enough time. Those conversations have to happen early on because a subject matter could be very technical. And that is who is going to then push for amendments even in parliament. However problematic those are, those things will need to be thought through.
Because we're really pressed for time, we can take maybe one question. No? Okay. Maybe would you like to give some final comments? Because I think both Bhavani and Ranga spoke, or we can close the call.
Yeah, just to add to the issue of engagement, I think it is only with continued public engagement that any sort of change can be seen. And when you say continued public engagement, there's this, just being candid, there's this notion that social media posts or criticizing on social media makes a big change. No doubt that like social media movements have a huge impact on public sort of will and how things goes. But there has to also be, like as people like Ranga and Bhavani have clearly demonstrated, the groundwork that physically goes into it as well. It's not just creating awareness. There is also a level of physical work that has to go into it. And I think it is with that legwork that, substantial changes come. Now, there are people who are very actively involved with wanting even in the reforms process. There are two types of people actually. There are people who will find a clip of an article somewhere and just put like a very critical piece of it and then just let it be there. Or there'll be people who actually want to engage and why is this happening? Is there anything that can be done? And it is the second type of people that causes some sort of change. And it is important, I think, that continues to happen, and organizations like hashtag, I like coming for things like this, because it's very clear that there are people who are genuinely interested in making those changes at a ground level and working towards it also. So just wanted to, in conclusion, thank you for having me. I had a really nice conversation with Bhavani and Ranga, and a very enjoyable discussion on some of the core issues that we are facing. And all the best with the other work that you're doing as well.
Thank you so much. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank all our panelists for being good sports, coming here, physical events, and also talking about a lot of things in such a short time. So special thanks to Dr. Rangpalan Surya, Mr. Shamil Zawahir, and Bhavani Fonseca for coming here and joining with us, and for the audience. So that's, and to whoever that joined with us online. Thank you so much. We hope to keep engaging, and I think with this we conclude the panel. Future